Hello. In another video, I have already discussed with you the theory of communicative action according to Habermas and his key ideas of discourse ethics. In this video, I am going to discuss with you the politics of Habermas, commonly known as the discursive model of democracy. Just as the theory of communicative action is necessary for discourse ethics, the discourse ethics is necessary for discursive model of democracy. The word discursive in the discursive model of democracy is analogous to the word deliberative. But by calling it discursive, it retains the connotation of Habermas' discourse ethics. So the discursive model of democracy basically means the deliberative model of democracy, but Habermas purposely uses the word discursive so that it echoes the idea of discourse ethics. The discursive model of democracy is an attempt by Habermas to apply discourse ethics to an institutional structure. Habermas distinguishes liberal and republican models of democracy, and he argues that each one of them is problematic for a variety of reasons. Liberal democracy focuses on individual rights and not on the active citizenry. The liberal democracy places too much emphasis on the market and not enough on working institutions. The republican democracy, in contrast, demands too much of its citizens. The republican model of democracy is too idealistic in the sense that it makes the democratic process dependent on the virtues of citizens devoted to the public realm. The mistake of the republican view consists in an ethical foreshortening of political discourse. These are the words of Habermas himself. The answer to the problems of liberal and republican democracy, according to Habermas, is the discursive model of democracy. This discursive model of democracy weaves together both the benefits of liberalism and republicanism. Liberalism, its focus on individual rights, and the insistence of republicanism on an ethical citizenry. According to this view of discursive model of democracy, practical reason withdraws from universal human rights or from the concrete ethical life of a specific community into the rules of discourse and forms of argumentation that derive their normative content from the validity basis of action oriented to reach understanding. Now, how does discursive model of democracy achieve this? First, it inherently recognizes the subjective equal worth of all citizens, a recognition that is completely in line with liberal individual rights. Key to this recognition is the three principles of discourse ethics: the principle of universalization, the principle of discourse, and the principle of consensus, which, as we have already noted, can roughly be broken into freedom, equality, and consensus. From these three principles, innumerable individual rights can be tested and agreed upon through discourse, furthering the scope of individual rights. Second, by placing the focus on dialogical communication between intersubjective individuals, the community-oriented view of a republican society is maintained. Habermas uses a term called will formation. This term is created by Habermas to mean that creating the will to achieve ends through discourse is an outcome of discursive situations on an equal playing field between citizens. Citizens, having reached consensus, are then acting as a political community to affect influential opinion. The key difference between republicanism and liberalism is their respective views of the role of the citizenry should play in recognizing and interacting with the government apparatus. Liberals, according to Habermas, consider democracy to legitimate the government, making it publicly acceptable, but nonetheless distinctly separate from the public sphere. Republicans, by contrast, consider democracy to constitute the government. Citizens create a distinct political community interdependent on each other. Discursive model of democracy distinguishes itself from both views by insisting that democracy should be based on rationalization. The procedures and communicative presuppositions of democratic opinion and will formation function as the most important parts for the discursive rationalization of the decisions of a government and an administration bound by law and statutes. This view requires more of the citizens than liberalism but less than republicanism. Whereas liberalism considers democracy a necessary tool for state legitimation and rights protection, it fails to give the citizenry the necessary stake in democratic activity. The Republican view, which considers the political community of citizens to constitute the government, is also unacceptable because it does not sufficiently distinguish the public from the government quite enough and depends only upon the politically devoted citizenry to act within a given polity. Discursive model of democracy creates solidarity in the public by engaging them with one another in a rational discourse, but it does not have them constitute the government in the strict sense of republican democracy. It legitimates the government, separates the private sphere from the public, and protects rights. But it does not simply stop there, as liberalism does. Instead, the power available to the administration under discursive model of democracy changes its general character once it is bound to a process of democratic opinion and will formation that does not merely retrospectively monitor the exercise of political power, but also programs it in a certain way. Notwithstanding this discursive rationalization, only the political system itself can act. It is a subsystem specialized for collectively building decisions, whereas the communicative structures of the public sphere comprise a far-flung network of senses that respond to the pressure of society-wide problems and stimulate influential opinions. While Habermas tries to give the theory of communicative action and discursive ethics a real grounding of possible application to existing democratic institutions with his discursive model of democracy, it is nevertheless hard for educated scientists, doctors, and ethicists engaging in discourse to reach a moral conclusion about a bioethical issue. So the question that is inevitably asked by the critics of Habermas is this idea of discursive model of democracy of Habermas a Marxist utopia? Discursive model of democracy would have a much harder time coming to fruition in a heavily populated society due to the need for an agreed upon set of rules that govern discursive modes acceptable to Habermas for effective norm testing. Ensuring universal communicative action would be nearly impossible, particularly in such an interest-centric realm as politics, where strategic considerations are so often devoted to individual, class, racial, and gender success. Moreover, assembling a sufficiently sizable group of people, even at the city or town level, to make any discursive outcome legitimately democratic would be extremely difficult to do. It is more plausible that the educated elites elected to represent the population would be small enough in number and high enough in intellect to utilize a theory of communicative action and discourse ethics towards a discursive model of democracy outcome. But the concentration of decision making, even democratically, in representatives instead of the people, which is the public sphere, instead of the private sphere, is exactly what Habermas doesn't want to do. Indeed, as Habermas mentions, the most important element of discursive model of democracy is the people shaping influential opinion. While Habermas is correctly critical of Marxist social theory, his own left leanings may be his own undoing. Discursive model of democracy is an attempt at theorizing a genuine democratic society where decisions are reached through rational intersubjective discourse between free, equal, and consensual participants. This ideal, while attractive, is utopian and a reflection of Habermas' dedication to socialism. Nonetheless, the theory of communicative action and particularly discourse ethics provide a sound discursive framework for cooperative norm testing through rationalization. The application of such a framework has innumerable possibilities. Discursive model of democracy offers an interesting third way of the democratic path dominated by republicanism and liberalism, particularly in the West. The fundamental logic of engaging in communicative action in order to reach valid conclusions through intersubjective dialogue is sound, and it is hard to raise an ethical argument against it. Habermas provides an interesting perspective with his theories that can help expand perspectives of not only deliberative democracy and ethics, but the very essence of meaningful social interaction. In facing the challenges of new social facts, critical theory, however, remains a vital philosophical tradition in normative disciplines of social and political philosophy. This vitality is enhanced when it considers a range of democratic claims that we are not able to discuss here, all of which equally challenge the fundamental frameworks of conceptions of democracy, justice, and their interrelationship. These include the struggles of Aboriginal peoples, the disabled, women, and more. One great advantage of the practical account is that it makes it easier to see why there are many different critical theories in different historical contexts, what Marx called the wishes and struggles of the age. On a practical account, critical inquiry aims at creating the reflective conditions necessary for the practical verification of its inquiry. And these conditions are not confined only to democratic institutions, but wherever publics employ critical social theories and methods as the moment of inquiry of their democratic politics. As new forms of critical theory emerge related to racism, sexism, and colonialism, reflective social agents have transformed these same democratic ideals and practices in the interest of emancipation. In entrenching new social facts, agents transform the ideals themselves as well as their institutional form. With this, I conclude my lecture on Habermas. Thank you very much.